Good morning, I'm Michael Barnett. I'm Chief Executive of the Auckland Business Chamber. And with me this morning, I have a number of chambers from around New Zealand. Also joining us this morning is the Honourable Stuart Nash, who has a lot of claims to fame, but I have him here today, Minister of Tourism, Minister of Small, Medium Businesses. I have a number of questions that we'd like to put to the Minister this morning. But Minister, I want to start off with something that as a group, the chambers that are with me today have worked on as a campaign. And that's about the issue of support for small, medium business in particular, and our suggestion that we use the resurgence subsidy to support businesses. And if you can bear with me for a moment, I'll just quickly cover this. But for us, it's a case of SMEs in particular, small, medium businesses have overheads. These overheads are rates, rents, utilities, hire purchase, ACC, etc. And when you stop and you look at a business, I think government has responded well with the wage subsidy. But the wage subsidy is a pass-through, and because most businesses would try to achieve the 80%, it becomes not only just a handling, but also a cost to them as they top it up. For businesses, there isn't anything. For the business, we're saying, yes, you've paid a one-off business resurgence, but that to me is about equivalent to 60% of 1 week's overheads. And so if that's the problem, I'm looking at what we see as the solution. And the solution that we see is that the resurgence payment be paid weekly through levels 3 and 4 for as long as the business complies with the 30% downturn in revenue. So I think there's probably variations of it you could play with. I know in the resurgence package, it's a one-off of $1,500. So you could look at a variation on that. There's also $400 per employee, up to 50. You could play with that. We don't mind, but what we'd like to see is some level of support for business. So I guess my first question is, I hope you've heard our message. I know that we have over 41,000 companies who are supporting our petition. And I wonder, are you hearing the same noise? And do you think we have a case to bring to you?
Yeah, let me make a couple of comments to start with, Michael. First of all, I would say I absolutely acknowledge that when a government closes down the economy in a way that we have done basically for the second time, it is really tough. There is no doubt about that. I acknowledge that. I also acknowledge that there are a number of businesses who went through that first lockdown and they adapted, and they adapted their business models to deal with a post-COVID environment or post-lockdown environment, in the knowledge that in fact we may be here again. And I remember seeing a whole lot of surveys done by a number of different organizations, and always the number one concern of businesses, it wasn't about labor, it wasn't about costs, it was always about going back into a lockdown scenario. It's why we worked incredibly hard to ensure that we didn't go into a lockdown scenario, but here we find ourselves now. So I do acknowledge this is really, really tough for a lot of small businesses. You're right, Michael. The wage subsidy is back up and running, and it's been modified to reflect the increase in wage costs. The resurgence payment, which we were able to design after the last lockdown, so we had a little bit more time to do it. When your small business cash flow loan scheme and your wage subsidies, they were developed and designed in with a great deal of urgency, because we were in that first lockdown last year. A little bit more time with the resurgence payment, but I absolutely hear what you're saying, and I understand you have got 41,000 small businesses from around the country voicing concerns. So what I can say is that I've been in contact with the Minister of Finance, and we will give consideration to further support. I know that you and your colleagues have some recommendations. Certainly very keen to take a look at those and see how we can work together to come up with a package that I can present to the Minister of Finance to say, hey, look, most of the businesses who are doing well now have survived that first lockdown. They're doing well in a post-lockdown environment from last year. So that they've come through that, they've adapted. What can we do to ensure they get through this lockdown and come out the other side, and allow them to continue unabated? So very, very happy to hear whatever proposal you've got, Michael.
Thank you, Minister. I think from the chambers that I have with me here today and the people that they represent, I know that they've been hearing the same. I know over the week I've spoken to tourism in Fiordland and Queenstown. I've spoken to recruitment companies in Rotorua, nurseries in Tauranga, manufacturing in the Waikato, and I've heard some sad and desperate stories of companies, small, medium businesses in particular, needing help to survive. And I know it's a tough call to keep on coming back to government, but business is sharing its share of the pain at the moment. What we have with this lockdown is a compounding effect. Many of these small, medium businesses were punished last year with something they'd never experienced before. They were just back on their feet, and now they're getting punished again. So on behalf of all of those who have signed our petition, and on behalf of all of the communities that these chambers on the call with you today represent, we're asking for help, and I'd look forward to meeting with your officials so we can put something to them.
Absolutely. Hey, Michael, I would say, as you know, we're not doing what we're doing to punish business in any way, shape or form. We do believe, and I think evidence shows that the sort of short, sharp lockdown to knock this COVID, certainly the Delta variant, on the head is the best way to get through this. I take a look across the Tasman and what's happening in New South Wales. They went for the sort of soft option to start with, and that proved to be an absolute disaster, to the point where they're now saying, well, we don't think we can get on top of this, therefore we're changing from an elimination strategy to a quote unquote live with it sort of strategy. We still believe that the elimination strategy is the best one to allow us to get back to a sort of a business as usual, whatever that looks like. But you know what I'm saying, a business as usual environment. Hence the reason why we have asked people to go really hard, but for not very long. I would say one of the roles I have the pleasure of doing is I chair the OECD's Digital for Small Business. And I talk to a number of my ministerial colleagues in other countries. And goodness me, some countries have done it really hard compared to New Zealand. It's not belittling what our small businesses are going through at the moment in any way, shape or form. But, I was reading the Xero latest business insights, I think came out yesterday. And I do genuinely believe that these short, sharp lockdowns in an effort to really nail this is in fact the best economic response. And you've heard every politician say this for the last 18 months. The best economic response is a health response. So the best health, is a health response. I think we've probably been proven right in that by looking at the economic growth, the levels of very low unemployment, and some of the other variables that go with an economy that's going very well. Having said that, though, the situation we find ourselves in is far from ideal, and so let's see what we can do to get out the other side quickly. But with those businesses that have really good, sound business models and can operate well and make a profit under normal times, let's see what we can do to help them out. So we certainly will give consideration to further support.
Absolutely, Minister, and not wishing to be pedantic, I didn't mean that it was punishment. The consequences of what we're doing is punishing. Yeah, when I have a look at landlords that are not being as tolerant as they should or as flexible as they could, when we look at bankers who are losing their patience, and when I look at some big businesses that could be paying smaller businesses in 7 and 10 days to help them with their cash flow, it isn't happening because everybody is feeling the pain of a compounding impact of further lockdowns. I'm going to take some questions from some of the other chambers. And again, having their voice coming to you is giving their communities an opportunity to be represented. So I'm going to go to Taranaki first, to Arun, and Arun, can I ask you to pose your question to the Minister?
Thank you, Michael. Minister, I think you're right. Elimination coupled with vaccinations on a mass scale is a great option. So my question is related to workers who are reluctant to get vaccinated. This makes it a real problem for employers because the vaccinated employees do not want to work alongside them. Can we have a lead from the government rather than asking businesses to sort this out?
Look, it's a very good point, and it's something I hear the whole time from the tourism industry, and that is, we've got workers who are expected to face, certainly when the borders open again, international customers. We know that the Pfizer vaccine has about a 90 to 95% efficacy when fully vaccinated. So, and you've heard the epidemiologists say that COVID will become part of our community, but when everyone's fully vaccinated, the impacts will be, significantly less than they are now. So the vaccination and full vaccination is the route out of here. But it's something that I'm working with Michael Wood on. At the moment, you can actually discriminate it. Well, you can use a non-vaccination as a reason not to hire someone. But at this stage, you can't use the reason of non-vaccination to fire someone or to make them redundant. So we're doing some work on this because, of course, health and safety has now morphed into, physical harm, people coming home from work alive, which is what we all want, of course, to what does that now mean in a workplace where the majority are vaccinated and one or two aren't. And so there are some big issues we're working through at the moment. It's a really thorny one. I have seen a legal opinion from a lawyer who wrote a piece for one of their large clients who said it is a grey area. I suspect it may end up being something that the courts determine, but I think that, what I said to Carla actually last time I was speaking to her in Hawke's Bay is that I would get some information to her. But Aaron, I just want to say it's a very grey area at the moment, and we're working through the implications of people who refuse to get vaccinated in the workplace.
Thanks very much, Minister. And I think, Arun, one of the things that we also need to keep in mind for employers is the consideration of other measures that could be taken. So if they don't feel safe, are there other areas of the business that they could operate in? Is there safety clothing that they could be wearing in order to offer them further protection and so on? But I agree 100% with the Minister. This is something that's probably going to go through a legal process to get definition. I've got a question from the Rotorua Chamber.
Thanks, Michael. Stuart, my question is Rotorua-centric. It's about the MIQ facilities that we're running here. We've been advised by MB that they're actually soliciting more hotels in Rotorua to convert to MIQ. We've been running 3 of our 11 4-star plus hotels as MIQ for about 18 months, as you know. And we're a tourism town in normal times. And the feeling in the community is that we've done our bit, or we're doing our bit, and any more would be getting close to an abuse of the local tradition of manaakitanga that's been practiced for about 200 years. Yeah. So is this going to happen, and what's your feelings about it?
Yeah, look, I've spoken to Steve about this and Tamati, and I hear where you're coming from. I'll take that feedback back to Cabinet, Bryce. It's a really tricky one because obviously, MIQ is a choke point for us. I will admit that, initially when we closed the borders down, we thought there would be a surge of Kiwis coming back, and there was. We didn't expect that there would be so many Kiwis who would continue to come back over such a long period of time. We've got to prioritise Kiwis over others. I think about 85% of those who have returned have been returning New Zealanders. You've heard the call go out saying those Kiwis who want to come home for Christmas, we prefer that you didn't. It's a really tough call, and it's a really big call, and it wasn't made without a lot of thought. But all I can say, Bryce, is I've heard the voice of Rotorua, and I'll take that back to my cabinet colleagues.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, Minister, and I will pick that up as well, Bryce, and do a follow through with you on that. We'll go now to Sue Stewart from the Whanganui Chamber. Sue.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, Minister. I'm wondering if there's a plan for reopening the borders, and if so, what's some of the thinking around that, and does it relate to the percentage of vaccinated population?
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it. So Cabinet at some point is going to have to make a very difficult decision about when we start opening the borders. The Prime Minister about 2 weeks ago launched our policy around reconnecting with the world. And what we basically said is we would take a risk-based approach. So, you know, we will assess the vaccine uptake in various countries and look to reconnect with them when we believe that the risk allows us to do so. You know, of course, we're talking about vaccine passports. I think you'll find that you won't be able to come to this country unless you're fully vaccinated. In terms of a percentage, no, we haven't set a number for that. And there's a very good reason for that. That being that we felt if we said, you know, we've got to get 80, 90 or whatever specific percentage, then when we reach that target, there'd be a lot of people that would go, oh, well, okay, I now know, well, I don't need to get vaccinated, I'm fine. You know, in an ideal world, so we would get 100% of our population vaccinated. What we do find is there is a very small cohort of anti-vaxxers, and they are really the tinfoil wearing group who believe this is some form of government conspiracy. It's not, just to let you know. But there is also a level of vaccine hesitancy. And what that hesitancy is basically is it's people who are saying, well, you know, do I need to get vaccinated? I haven't got COVID in my neighborhood. I think I might be okay. Let me just have a look and see what's going around my community. When they see people who have been vaccinated and they're all fine and they realize that, in fact, this is the way forward, that hesitancy tends to drop. One thing that the research shows is hesitancy has kicked in different countries at different levels. And so it's at that point that we release more information and more education and encouragement to say to people, you know what, the fastest way to get back to a business as usual economy and community and global environment is for everyone to get vaccinated. So that's the reason why we haven't said we have a target. But at some point, Cabinet is going to have to make a very difficult decision about when we push go on reconnecting with the world. I think it's pretty clear that we won't be having an Australian bubble again, certainly before that reconnecting strategy kicks in, because as you've heard, they've pretty much thrown up their hands and abandoned the elimination strategy, certainly in New South Wales and Victoria. So no target, but please do have a look at that reconnecting with the world strategy. I can flick some stuff through to Michael if that's helpful, and that will outline how the approach we're taking and will take to literally reconnecting New Zealand with the global community.
Great, thanks. Nice to hear that there'll be a passport preventing people from coming here if they haven't been jabbed.
Yeah.
Carla from the Hawke's Bay.
Hi, Stuart. So I want to look at businesses who can operate safely. And I'd just like to view it from a lens of COVID may be a reality we live with. Will government look at amending the current lockdown rules and behaviours so that business can operate at different levels?
Yeah, it's a very good point. One thing we have said is that lockdowns will continue to be a tool in our toolbox, but if we have a fully vaccinated population or a very high percentage of the population vaccinated, then the need to use lockdown will be greatly diminished. So if we have 90% plus, and hypothetically, if we found a COVID outbreak in Woodville, then obviously we wouldn't. Well, not obviously, but the belief is you wouldn't need to lock down Auckland, for example. What we're hearing, and I think most of us have probably heard this as well. If you're fully vaccinated and you end up getting COVID, it can be anything from like a cold to the flu. What it does mean is you don't end up in hospital, and worst case scenario, you don't end up, heaven forbid, dead. So fully vaccination fully vaccinated population is by far the best way through to stop these lockdowns. In terms of being able to work in lockdown, we have amended some of the rules from the first lockdown period, but keeping in mind the main premise behind a level 4 lockdown is that we absolutely minimize contact between people. And what we have seen already in Auckland is 3 cases of transmission from within the workplace, i.e. someone has had COVID, they've gone to work in an essential service and they've given COVID to their workmates. So that's the principle behind the level 4. People stay at home, out of work, unless it's absolutely essential. So, you know, the more we allow businesses to work under a level 4 or level 3, the greater that opportunity that they're going to transmit COVID, and the greater the chances will stay in lockdown longer. But certainly, Carla, you know, lockdown is our least preferable option in dealing with this. Hence the reason why we just urge everyone to get vaccinated, and urge all your workmates and your colleagues and anyone that is hesitant, then, you know, we're going to provide a whole lot of information to hopefully allay any fears they may have.
I think I was referring more to the large manufacturing organisations like PAMPAC and some forestries in different parts that wouldn't necessarily operate their full business, but could very, very safely operate with their robust health and safety measures a part of their business. Would government look at that again to see if they can actually open up more?
Yeah, well, under the health orders, we actually have allowed some businesses to operate that we felt were essential, that some might have thought, you know, maybe weren't. But in my role as excuse me, as Minister of Forestry, what we have allowed is some businesses that perhaps weren't deemed essential per se to operate in order to maintain the economy. And let me give you one example. We allowed logs to be collected off log skids in certain areas so they could take them to the port so they could fill ships. Now, transporting logs in itself is not an essential service, but ensuring that our supply chains remain open and our economy can function is essential. So there's, you know, under the health order, there's clause 18, which some businesses have been able to operate under. There's also Schedule 2, Part 29, which means that if you're not an essential business, but you're supporting essential businesses, that you can operate. But in terms of PAMPAC as an example of, you know, them coming to us and saying, hey, we know we can operate under level 4 safely, it sort of goes against the fundamental premise of level 4, which is the least amount of people working as possible, because that just mitigates the risk of COVID spreading in the workplace. So, you know, we'll have a look at this, but I think the settings we've got at the moment are probably where we're going to end up for level 4, Carla, on that.
Okay, thank you, Minister. And again, I can see where Carla's coming from. There seems to be more about what you can't do rather than giving the conditions and behaviours under which you could operate. And
oh no, well, Michael, I would, if people struggle, have a look at clause 18 of the current health order. There are a number of conditions there under which businesses could operate. But in terms of just a business that isn't essential, but, you know, would lose a hell of a lot of money under level 4, and I do get it. You know, financially it is a significant hit. But really, I'll just reiterate, really the purpose of level 4 is minimizing contact between humans who may be carrying the virus. That's really what the whole level 4 thing's about.
It's a health thing, not a business thing. I'm going to go to Kelly Bizade from the Cambridge Chamber. Kelly.
Thanks, Michael, and good morning, Minister. So New Zealand already has the capability for workplace COVID saliva testing, but it still needs to go to the lab. As I understand it, that's because government has not approved the import of on-the-spot testing services, which gives a 10-minute result. Would that not be best practice for businesses moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I know, talking to Dr. Aisha Verrill, who's one of our COVID ministers, but also is an infectious diseases expert, you know, we are looking at saliva testing. One of the problems with saliva testing is it doesn't have the high level of integrity that, for example, swabs have. So the slight risk with it, Kelly, and this isn't a reason for not implementing it going forward, but certainly the risk with it is someone will saliva test, they'll get a negative result and go, I'm fine, away I go. And I think, the new tests may have a slightly higher level of integrity, but certainly the initial ones had about a 60% level of integrity. And we just felt that that wasn't high enough to put out in the marketplace to give any level of certainty. We are using saliva tests at certain areas around, front-facing border, but into the workplace, certainly in a place like Auckland, it just does come with that slight risk that people will test themselves. They'll come out negative and think they're fine when in fact the test hasn't given them a true reading. But we are continuing to look at these technologies to see if we can roll them out in a way that does provide that level of integrity, but as well as certainty.
Thanks, Minister. From Southland Chamber, Cherie Carey. Cherie.
Good morning. My question, Minister, is on behalf of the Fiordland Business Association, and we're just after wanting to know if there's going to be any further assistance for Fiordland. Now they're 18 months into an ongoing fight for survival, and the loss of 75% of their international visitors. The domestic boom's not making the way that far, but the money that has come has been mostly for marketing, but they're saying, who are you marketing to? And they're not seeing any kind of reward for the amount of investment that the government's given so far. So is there any more assistance for Fiordland and the likes of those tourism really hard hit areas on the cards?
I announced a couple of months ago a package for those 5 regions that have been hardest hit by the lack of international visitors, and Fiordland certainly one of those. Within that, there was up to $5,000 worth of business advice around how to cope in these stressful times, and then another $5,000 that we're providing to each business that would allow them to implement the advice they got. There's obviously the mental health services that we've rolled out in those 5 regions. We have a business resurgence payment which has been rolled out to those 5 regions, which means that if they have a business loss, I think it's 40%, that when we implement the reconnecting strategy, that they'll be able to access a significant portion of money that will allow them to get up and running again. So there was about a $100 million package across those 5 hardest hit regions in the lower South Island, which wasn't rolled out across the rest of the country. So if you're not aware of those, Cherie, then I'm absolutely willing to get my officials to be in touch with you and send down those measures that we have implemented for your part of the world.
Yep, no, completely aware of those, and they are grateful. It's just that it's not really cutting the mustard, I guess, and also the criteria for that decline in income, they were hit by the floods, so the dates don't fit for their loss because they were already having a loss. So I think that they are really struggling with being able to meet the criteria of the loss, given the fact that they were already been affected by the floods earlier in the year. So
okay. If some businesses are finding that that's the case, I am very happy to look through those floods and say, that's a one-off event. I don't count that as business loss. So we'll look at business as it was in a sort of a pre-COVID world. So don't worry about those floods. We will absolutely look through that in terms of assessing someone's ability to access the services that we've provided down there.
That would be great. Thank you.
2 quick questions, Minister, and then we'll wind up. Nigel McWilliams from Morrinsville. Nigel, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Good morning, Minister. Yes, just using some of our political capital in Morrinsville, Minister, I'm wondering whether the support from the government with the wages subsidies, great, much appreciated, but the reality is we've got to give a third of it back the next month by way of PAYE. And just wearing another hat, I'm a chartered accountant here in Morrinsville, and what we'd like to see is at least a rebate on PAYE whilst we're under lockdown, and whether that could be considered. It's proportional to employers and employees, of course. Should be easy enough to administer at IRD, we pay it and then it comes back, something like that. Has that been considered?
Yeah, we did look at whether, when we initially set this up last year, whether it should be taxable or not. In the end, it was income, so we decided it should be. Having said that, Nigel, what I would say is to businesses who are struggling to meet their tax obligations to please give the Inland Revenue a call. David Parker, who is now the Minister of Revenue, as mentioned, I was Minister of Revenue last term, has just brought something to Cabinet to give the Commissioner of Inland Revenue the power to work with companies to allow them to delay their meeting their tax obligations without incurring interest and penalties. So what I would say is any business that is struggling to meet their tax obligations, please don't bury your head in the sand. Please give Inland Revenue a call and come up with some sort of scheme that will allow you to meet your obligations.
Thanks very much, Minister. I'm going to take my final question from Queenstown, from Ruth Stokes. Before I do, I think it is worth reminding people that IRD are making allowance for businesses that are under pressure, and I think that's been a great call. And the other very important call that I want to put out right now is that businesses on a wage subsidy, now is the time to put their claim in for the second period. So get it in. You can't backdate, but you can claim for this period. I'm going to go now to Ruth Stokes, Queenstown. Ruth.
Thank you, Michael. Minister, Cherie asked you the question around ongoing or additional support potentially for business costs for those who are particularly affected by not a short, sharp lockdown, but an 18-month lockdown of their customers. Now that we know that we're not going to have international travel really until 2022, and that's going to take some time to ramp up, is there an opportunity to potentially look at subsidising the demand side, so potentially travel vouchers, or encouraging people to visit the regions through summer when we know New Zealanders like to head to the beach?
Yeah, look, it's a really good point. And I would say, I think since I've been Minister of Tourism, I've been down to Queenstown about 5 times. It's a beautiful part of the world, but I also understand that the businesses in Queenstown have been hit particularly hard, as Wanaka and Fiordland and Te Aonau, etc. One thing I would say is we did have a look at this at one point, Ruth, because Australia did this, of course. They released about $1 billion worth of travel vouchers. And we talked to Air New Zealand. Air New Zealand's domestic loadings, they were actually really, really high. They were getting back to pre-COVID levels. And this showed that New Zealanders actually were travelling in a way that they'd never travelled before. The interesting thing, and I think Renee, who's head of Tourism New Zealand, will admit this, is that domestic tour in pre-COVID times, what do we call them, PC times, pre-COVID times, domestic tourism made up about 60% of the tourism market anyway. And I don't think, not only did we not take it for granted, I think we probably ignored it. But now that it is so important, what you'll continue to see is Tourism New Zealand, who used to just have an international mandate, now bring a lot of their skills and competencies and marketing genius into the domestic market. So we'll continue to run campaigns to get Kiwis to travel. Queenstown, I know, has seen a huge increase in domestic tourism, but I am well aware that that certainly hasn't taken the place of the lack of international tourists. I'm well aware of that. But I don't, from what I've seen and talking to Air New Zealand, I don't think we need to offer travel vouchers. We just need to get Kiwis travelling. And I'm also well aware, acutely aware, that when Auckland is in lockdown, that has a massive impact on tourism right across the country. So, you know, we may have the South Island in alert level, 2 or even 1, but if Aucklanders can't travel, we really need to get Auckland out of this and to get them down to Queenstown and Wanaka and all the places that they can fly into. So we're not considering travel vouchers, but we certainly will run a really, really strong campaign to get Kiwis away from the beach down to Queenstown and doing things that they haven't done before.
Thanks, Minister. I'm a little bit like Ruth. I have a look at the $11 billion that Kiwis spend on international travel every year. And I think it's going to be a case of changing behaviours, of changing the patterns of how they think. And if we need to incentivize to create that change, then we should be thinking about what it is that we can do. But I think that'll be something for Ruth and I and others to come back to you on.
Can I just say, Michael, that domestic tourism spend increased about 16% last year versus pre-COVID times. So Kiwis are travelling in a way that they haven't travelled before, obviously because they can't travel overseas. But, you know, I've talked to a number of my friends who have gone to places and done things that they have never done before. What I would say to everyone is, come to Hawke's Bay. It doesn't get any better than this. Just look at TV3. We're always the nation's top temperature. But as you all know, there are plenty of fantastic things that you can do in all your wonderful parts of the world. And so it's one of the reasons we've given $26 million to all our regional tourist organisations, or the RTOs, so they can continue doing the fantastic job they're doing in marketing their region to the rest of the country.
Minister, I promised you I'd stick to my half hour, and I have sort of. If I can just wind up by saying, first of all, thanks very much for accepting the invitation. To the chambers that have joined us this morning, I think it's an assurance to them that the thousands of small, medium businesses that they represent, that you're taking time to listen to their voice. So I appreciate it. I would like to finish where I started. The resurgence payment, we believe that the petition that we've run this week, with over 40,000 businesses putting their hands up and saying we need help, is a big signal to government that this is a way in which we can ensure that we're going to have businesses there ready to employ, ready to kick our economy back into shape when we get out of lockdown. We'd like you to consider the proposition that we have made, which is to extend the resurgence payment and to extend it to a weekly payment for the period of time that we have 3 or 4 lockdown, and to pay it out on a weekly basis. We're happy to discuss this with you. We'd like you to take our case to the Minister of Finance. We need a result.
No, look, thank you very much, Michael. As you know, I am a huge fan of Chambers of Commerce. I think they do an awesome job in their community. I've never been able to understand, if you're a business owner, why you would not join your local chamber. And I enjoy these sessions, Michael, in good times and bad. I'm always happy to come along and answer questions. And I would just like to say to everyone, thank you very much for the support you are providing to the hundreds of thousands of small businesses up and down our country. It is a really tough time. I absolutely acknowledge that. I will take your petition to the Minister of Finance. And, you know, I can't promise anything, but as the Minister of Finance has said, we certainly are giving consideration to further support. But thank you very much for your time and your hard work. Hugely appreciated.
Brilliant. Thank you, Minister.